Welcome to Talk Learning with me. I'm Joseph Diaz, an instructional designer passionate about connecting with others and exploring the field of learning and development. In this podcast, we dive into topics like education, learning science, facilitation, behavior change, and other skills related to personal and professional growth. If you're looking to connect with lifelong learners and discover new insights from talented learning professionals, this show is for you. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Beth Cougler Blom, a seasoned facilitator, learning designer, and the founder of BCB Learning. Beth is also the author of Design to Engage, How to Create and Facilitate a Great Learning Experience for Any Group, and she's also the host of the Facilitating on Purpose podcast. In this episode, Beth and I explore the work of facilitation, what it means, how it applies in different settings, and why it's an essential skill for creating meaningful learning experiences. Beth shares insights on inclusive facilitation, designing for engagement, and how we can all become better facilitators, whether in formal workshops, meetings, or everyday conversations. And now, let's talk facilitation. Welcome, Beth, to the show. Thank you so much for being here. We were just talking, and I'm just so excited. We have had to postpone this chat for a couple of months now, and I'm just so excited. Ever since we first connected over LinkedIn, just talking about podcasting and facilitation, I've just been so excited to chat with you. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm excited too. It's always great to nerd out on talking about learning and facilitation and language as well. So thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned language. That's something that got me really excited too, is I feel like in the language of learning and development, there's just so much that you could talk about and break down. What does this word mean? And how do I take the word facilitation? Am I a facilitator? How do I get better at facilitating? All kinds of things like that. And so before we jump into that, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I wanted to ask you, Beth, could you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who are just getting to know you for the first time?
Sure, I guess I'll start with some of those terminology things that are sometimes hard to explain, but I'm a facilitator and a learning designer, and I have a company that does this work, a small business, and there's myself and a couple people that I employ in the business, and then we have a couple of subcontractors here and there that support us. And we work with companies usually or organizations to help them design courses. And that's a big part of our work, the learning design side. And then the facilitation side is that sometimes we teach people about learning design and sometimes we teach people about facilitation. And then we do meeting facilitation as well. So we kind of have three different things that we're doing. I'm on the west coast of Canada. So I'm in Victoria and it's on Vancouver Island. So I'm a West Coast person and yeah, just enjoying a nice life here leading my business.
Fantastic. That sounds like a beautiful work life to be managing, and also very busy managing a team, managing your own business, and then wearing many hats, it sounds like too, which I think sometimes can be one of the most exciting parts about being a learning designer, is all of those hats that we wear and getting to help people learn and create great learning experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had experience in the past as a learning designer inside an organization. I did work with Royal Roads University for a number of years. And I've also worked with the Canadian Red Cross in that kind of role, although we didn't call it that term when I worked with them. But now I know it was learning design that I was doing it. I think we called it online course writer, and it was many years ago. But
That's
just
so
it's
cool.
interesting to see how the role can change with whether you're inside or outside of an organization. You know, those of us that are drawn to entrepreneurship, we get some variety in the work because I get to work with all sorts of different clients, and sometimes they're individuals and sometimes they're organizations, and it's always something different, which keeps me interested in the role usually.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I love that those past experiences designing learning, even though your title wasn't learning designer, it led you down that path of the getting to the work that you do today, which is super cool. And I think that's a whole nother rabbit hole I could go down forever, is just how many different titles there are in the world, where essentially we are just designing learning, helping create good learning experiences. And so you said that now you work for yourself. I'm just curious, Beth, what does a typical day look like in the life of Beth Cougler Blom today?
It's Probably a lot of sitting at my desk these days. I have a home office here where I'm coming and chatting with you from, but depends what projects we have, because sometimes we get more facilitation projects and then I'm out and about and doing things in person. And we also facilitate online. So again, I'm here at the office. But this year, for whatever reason, we haven't had a lot of facilitation requests, just kind of speckled throughout the year. So most days this year, I'm at my home office here and working on various types of projects and meeting with clients online usually. So it's a little bit funny sometimes where you don't know what's coming towards you as the next project. And right now I feel like I've had a lot of at my desk projects. I'm kind of waiting for a little bit more let's get out into the world kind of projects to
Yeah.
pepper back in. So sometimes I can't control that, but I'm ready for a little bit of more out and aboutness coming
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
That's super cool. I love that you mentioned that sometimes there's kind of phases or seasons of the work that you do, that sometimes I feel like, man, I cannot seem to get out of building PowerPoint decks, or all of a sudden I'll have a slump, or not a slump, but a long time where I'm just making e-learning. And I think, wow, is this all I do? And then I'll be facilitating a lot, and it kind of comes and goes in waves. And so I love the way you described those seasons of not as much facilitation right now. It's a little bit speckled here and there, but it sounds like, is that something that you would say maybe charges your batteries, or is kind of an exciting part of the work that you do, is getting to have those facilitation opportunities?
Absolutely. And I facilitated something this morning because I'm teaching a 4-week course right now for Royal Roads with a colleague of mine. And it is energizing to meet with the group in Zoom for 2 hours and have those discussions and the activities. It's a liberating structures course that we're teaching right now. But yeah, you just really never know. I mean, I love the times too, just sitting at my desk, pondering over something, trying to be creative. But I think sometimes I'm not super spiritual in terms of the universe kind of woo-woo stuff, but sometimes I think, well, the universe kind of conspires to give us what we want. I remember facilitating quite a lot online, especially, of course, when COVID hit. And I'd been
Mm-hmm.
teaching online and helping people teach online for years before that. I think I started in about 2005 with online learning. But at one point I thought, I'm burned out on this too. And
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I taught people how to do it, but I was doing it too much. And so I started to say, okay, it'd be nice if I didn't have so much online teaching. And then it goes
Yeah.
away for a while, right? And now I feel like I kind of want it back. But certainly the in-person I'd love a little bit more now, facilitation too.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've definitely seen that myself, that when I am starting to kind of ramp up, at first there's that initial thrill of I'm in charge of these groups and I'm leading discussion, and the energy of the people I'm working with is so much fun. And then maybe it gets to be a little bit too much of facilitating. I think, okay, I think I need a little bit less. It's like there's definitely a fine balance of how much time you can spend, especially with virtual facilitating. And that's actually, I haven't had a chance to do in person. So that's really neat that you had the chance to do both, a little bit of online virtual facilitation and then in person, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true because I guess, I mean, I'm older than you, Joseph. So I've had a lot of years of work experience, but I started in person many years ago, more than 20 years ago, I guess, with in-person facilitation. And then because I got the chance to work with the Red Cross and started designing e-learning, and then eventually moved into a volunteer center position
Mm-hmm.
where I coordinated learning and started developing online learning for them, and jumped to Royal Roads as an instructional designer. It was really at Royal Roads when I started there in 2012, I want to say, that I started getting more opportunities to really, I guess, dig in more deeply to facilitation skills themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had been doing it for a while, but going into the post-secondary system when there's a whole scholarship of teaching and learning there, and they're, kind of the big E educators.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
education faculties, right? People have been trained in education. And that was such a gift for me who had started in kind of public sector, nonprofit sector. Like it was a beautiful place to start. But I straddled both worlds for a while, and I really saw that in education there's more deep research going on, and sometimes we just don't have that in the other fields, right? And so
Yeah.
those of us that can work across sectors, it's wonderful because we can bring that learning from one place to another. And it's kind of why I wrote my book eventually, because I wanted to foremost give it back to the nonprofit sector and say, hey, if you fell into facilitation, if you fell into designing learning and you didn't really get a grounding in it, I went and did a master's in adult education, but how many people do that? I mean, maybe not a lot, right? Who actually
Yeah.
hold the title of facilitator. So I wrote a book to say, here's a practical guide for how to do this if you sort of became a facilitator accidentally. So that's what it became. And it's been nice to be able to work back and forth between all of the worlds.
Yeah, that's such an exciting journey, and kind of going from initially in-person instruction and then kind of getting to work towards in-person and hybrid and remote and all of that. And then, like you said, different sectors are different experiences too. And I agree. I've seen some of the different practices from higher ed are totally different from the practices of corporate work. And so it's cool to get to even just talk with people in different sectors and see what they're doing. I love that we've been talking about these different modes of facilitation. Something I wanted to ask you, Beth, is how would you define facilitation? You talked about it being something that people sometimes fall into in their career. They end up being a facilitator by accident. But what is facilitation for you, or how would you define facilitation?
I don't know if I have a great textbook definition. I mean, maybe when I wrote my book, I said it's from the root of facile. I don't know if that's actually true. Sometimes we say that that's true, right? It comes from the French facile, like to make easy. But I don't know, to say there's the two different types of facilitation that not everybody really realizes too. I mean, some of us are facilitating process. We're facilitating meetings, so strategic planning or something like that. And then some of us are facilitating learning when we're leading courses or workshops. And not everybody uses the same word of facilitation for both of those situations, but I do, because I like to think of it's sort of like a state of mind, right? Or a philosophy, is that when we think of ourselves as facilitating someone's learning or someone's process, we're just supporting the group, aren't we? We don't come in with all of the answers. We collaborate together to find the way. So we have a bit of a plan as people who design the experience, whatever it is, but we're just trying to help something to happen. And that's a very long-winded answer, I guess, about what facilitation is. We're trying to help groups do something process-wise, and we're maybe helping them do something content-wise on the learning side. So it could be one or the other, or maybe a little bit of both, of course.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I love that you kind of had the technical, how would I define this? And I really like that tie into facile that you said in it's kind of a French origin. I know that same word is in other Romance languages like Spanish, Portuguese. So I love that concept of we're making things easier for people. But then I also love thinking about how are we facilitating a process and then also content. That's something that I had never thought of. So I really, really love the way you've simplified such a broad and maybe ambiguous topic and said, well, what are we looking at? Are we looking at processes? Are we looking at content? And how are we making things easier for our learners or the people we're interacting with? Is that the right way of kind of describing facilitation?
I think so, right? And not everybody would describe it that way because we're all using different words, and that's part of the problem. I mean, some people might say, well, I'm teaching a course or I'm the instructor for a course.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm facilitating learning. I'm facilitating a learning experience. And so there's a language difference there that not everybody really agrees with, or we have different things that are happening across different sectors, as I said. But I don't know, again, it goes back to the philosophy. And not everybody thinks about words being philosophies like we might, but facilitation is a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's how we think of ourselves coming in to work with this group. If we come in and think we have all the answers and we're going to just bull in a china shop everything and make the group do what we want, I mean, that's not facilitation, is it?
Yeah.
I hope that's nothing. I hope no one's doing that.
Right.
But, like we often hear different words like instructor or instruction or training, maybe to be more unidirectional. And I'm going to teach you something, I'm going to take content and I'm going to put it in your head.
Yeah.
And facilitation is different. We're creating the content together when we think of ourselves as a facilitator of learning. So I wrote a whole section about language in my book. There's tons of things around just even the word facilitator, but all the other words we use that can be so interesting to talk about, but also really confusing for people as well.
Yeah. And I love how intentional you are about the use of the word facilitation, that some people might not think twice about it and say, oh, I'm a facilitator, or I'm an instructor, I'm an educator. And like you said, maybe people see them as synonymous, or some see them as completely different. And I love that you also take into account what is my relationship with the learners, and that as a facilitator, what is the environment I'm creating for the people I'm interacting with. I had an experience actually just today. We were on a new hire training call, and oftentimes with new hires, I definitely see myself as the one that's, like you just said, transferring that information. But then we actually had a training video, and one of the new hires said, I knew the person in that training video from 10 years prior in my career. And all of a sudden I felt like I was just the one learning of, well, wow, you've worked with the expert himself that's in our training video, and you worked with them a decade ago. Tell me what you learned. I'd love to hear your experience. So I love that you pointed out that facilitating really can be not just coming in and the bull in the china shop and telling everyone what to do and how to do things, but oftentimes we are creating an environment where people can learn, but then also share from their own background, share from their own experience.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned your own learning as well as a facilitator. And I think the older I get and the more I talk to people who have been doing it for a while, the older facilitators, if you will, that they're the ones that say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. And sometimes they'll say to the group, I don't know what the best thing is to do here. What do we all think? And let's attack this together and try to figure it out together. Like, people who've been doing the role for a while seem to be able to say, it's okay that I don't have all the answers here. And they don't worry about that. And in fact, it's almost a goal to go in and go, okay, let's really do this together and figure this out, because one person cannot hold everything for everyone. Like, especially now in this day and age, I mean, I'm a white middle-aged woman. Like, I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions, and I hope the group can, we can all answer them together. So it's a great situation when I learn too from my groups, and that's a really exciting day, isn't it? When someone makes us think and go, well, we haven't come across that before. Okay, let's all learn together. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's super cool hearing from a seasoned facilitator like yourself that even now, all these years later, we can all the time be learning from the people that we facilitate with. There's never a time where I've learned all the things and no one is going to teach me otherwise. And I think that's what's so cool about being in these types of roles, like facilitating and having those responsibilities, is you get to be a lifelong learner. You're never going to say, I'm here to teach you and please don't tell me otherwise. But facilitating really can be this environment of learning for everybody, facilitator and attendee, or facilitator and participant, to be able to say, hey, this is my learned experience. This is what I've seen in my work, or maybe from another job that I did, and learn from one another.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we create space for that, it's just a much better experience. And it actually leads to better outcomes, I think, right? Like, again, the one person doesn't know all the answers. And if we charge ahead like that, we aren't going to get to that better place that we could if we really just opened it up for the entire group to say, oh yeah, this thing that I saw over here in my other job or my other past experience, this could work here. And then everyone goes, oh, wow, thank you for telling us that, right? But if we never invite people in, we'll never have those better outcomes. So we have to remember, we're there for the learners, aren't we? When we're facilitating learning, we're there for the meeting attendees or the meeting participants when we're facilitating process. So we're just, again, like, what is facilitation? We're just trying to help people get to some sort of goal and get there well. And there's, ineffective things we can do along the way, and there's effective things we can do. And yeah, sometimes the group teaches us.
Yeah. And I love how simply you put that we are there for the learners. And not to put you on the spot too much, but as you think back over your career, or even just some of the recent work you've done, are there any standout experiences that have shaped your understanding or that definition of facilitation for you, that have helped you kind of see, I'm shaping processes, I'm shaping content? Are there specific experiences or maybe moments you had that really helped define facilitation for you?
I think so. And I was lucky to maybe meet certain people along the way that were mentors to me. And I don't know if I always realized it at the time that they were that, but looking back, sometimes it's easier, it's clearer to see those kind of sliding doors moments, or those people that were that for us. But right when I started my career, I started working at the University of British Columbia right out of fourth year university many years ago. I was in international programs. And so I was on the coordinating the program, right, on the administrative side. And I'd been abroad and lived abroad, and I was really interested in intercultural things. And so I thought, well, maybe I should take a tester course in education to see if I could do a master's in that. And even I took a third year course, and I had already graduated. So I went back and took this third year course with this professor named Dan Pratt at the time. And Dan had written a book, and I have no idea what it's called now, but he talked about these different teaching styles, for maybe lack of a better word. And there was transmission and whatever the other ones were, right? And I knew I did not want to do transmission. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want that presentation, that lecture style. It just never felt authentic to me. And I wanted more of the nurturing, we would say effective domain, like kind
Yeah.
of values, beliefs. Like I really believed in all of those pieces. And so I was just lucky to take this course that really asked me, and I had to write a teaching philosophy and say, what is and I hadn't even taught yet. I'm like, I don't know what my teaching philosophy is, but these things are resonating with me about just how I am in the world and how I
Yeah.
had learned from other cultures. And I knew I didn't have all the answers already. Right. I don't know. So taking Dan's class and then going on to do that master's was really pivotal. But just, I don't know, even starting on the administrative side, like I worked at this volunteer center and I used to hire trainers and facilitators to do all sorts of workshops and nonprofit related topics, right? Like board governance and
Yeah.
fundraising and things like that. And so I hired trainers and facilitators and I sat in all of their rooms for 6 years. I sat in those rooms, just dozens of workshops over that time period. And I just watched and learned. And I think if people are trying to learn facilitation, like just go and sit in other people's classrooms, in other
Yeah.
people's experiences, right? And just watch and learn and see what feels authentic and what doesn't, and what you can steal, quote unquote,
Yeah.
and what you don't want to do. So the practice piece has always, like I did take the graduate degree, but the practice piece has always been super pivotal for me. Like watch and learn and ask questions and just get together with other people who do the thing, right? Like the
Yeah.
communities of practice as well have been really impactful, like Liberating Structures Community and something called the Instructional Skills Workshop that was in the post-secondary system that really drew upon the philosophies that resonated with me too. So yeah, all of those things and probably a lot more that I haven't said.
That's really cool. And you mentioned earlier hindsight being 2020. I think you helped me even see that you talked about. You look back and realize, "Oh, that helped me get better at facilitation," because I remember the first time I watched somebody else facilitate, their style was very different than what I felt comfortable with. And I thought, oh, never mind. Where's the door? I could never be a facilitator. I could never do what that person just did. I just felt so intimidated. And then I watched somebody else and they had a very different demeanor. They weren't as upbeat and high energy, but they were still engaging. And I thought, okay, actually, pause. Maybe I can facilitate. And so I love that invitation that you said to just watch and learn and just see, because I don't think anybody needs to facilitate the exact same as anybody else. I think that's what's so cool. We can kind of infuse our own personality into the experiences and the facilitation that we create. And so it can be very authentic. I don't have to be the upbeat person that I just watched or that I'm following up. And I also don't have to be the perfectly academic and scholarly person that someone else might be, which that might work really well for them and the groups that they facilitate. But at the end of the day, sometimes maybe my secret sauce is just who I am or just who Beth is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I would never want people to sit in my room or participate in my sessions and think, "Oh, I can't be like Beth, like therefore I will never facilitate." Like I would just be like devastated if I thought someone went away. So I do try to give that advice that you just gave to people too. It's like we can all be facilitators. I mean, maybe there's some people that can't. I don't know. I don't know who that is. Really, I'm like, I'd have to think about it. I think we can
Yeah.
all be facilitators if we want to, and we practice and we learn and we keep learning and keep growing. Like
Uh-huh.
I guess if you had a mindset that was closed and you thought you knew it all and you never were going to learn, like maybe that's going to not be a great or effective facilitator. And thinking about representation, like we need people who are diverse, like all of us who, look diverse, are age diverse, neurodiverse, all the different
Yeah.
ways that we can be different from each other. We need people to facilitate who represent that. And I know I interviewed a woman named Maya Chupkov on my podcast, and she has a podcast called Proud Stutter. And actually, my
That's
editor,
cool.
Mary, introduced me to her because she was on Mary's podcast first. And I thought, stuttering and facilitation, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that before. What happens when you stutter? Like, can you facilitate when you stutter?
Yeah.
And of course you can, like it's accessible to people who stutter. And so it was a fascinating conversation. It's why I love having a podcast like you, Joseph.
Yeah.
It's, let's have a conversation about how we can be inclusive to people who stutter to be facilitators, for people who professionally use their voice. And it's not an issue. So it's accessible to all of us.
Yeah. You make me think of the slogan where Nike says, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And almost for facilitation, you could say, if you learn, you're a facilitator. And it isn't, you don't have to be, just like with athletics, you don't have to be 6'2" or LeBron James to be an athlete. You don't have to be strong. If you have a body, you're an athlete. And the same thing goes for facilitating. If you learn, like you said, if you have an open mind to learn new things and to share knowledge with other people, you can be a facilitator. If you want to help other people learn, and if you want to learn and grow yourself, it sounds like that's the qualification. I love that you make that so accessible. If you stutter, you can still be a facilitator. If you don't know very much, well, we can start learning together and we can be facilitators.
Yeah, I love that you said if we can learn, because in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, if we have a voice, we can be facilitators. And it's like, I immediately discounted that, going, no, because of course we can have deaf and hard of hearing facilitators. I mean, we don't actually have to have an audible voice either.
Yeah.
So I love that you made the connection to learning, because that is accessible to all of us if we want it.
That's so cool. You took my thought and just took it to another level, made it even cooler. So thank you so much for connecting those dots. I love that. That accessibility of being a facilitator doesn't even stop at if you can speak, if you can see, if you can hear. It's just, that cognitive, if you can learn, and if you have that desire, which is super cool. And then you had talked about, if you want to learn more, you should watch other facilitators, watch and learn. And so my initial thought was, well, maybe I could go watch some of my coworkers facilitate. If somebody wanted to learn more about facilitation so that they could watch and learn and they didn't really know where to go, where would you recommend somebody start so that they could kind of get that experience watching and learning other facilitators if that wasn't immediately available in their workplace?
Yeah, there's probably lots of things outside of a workplace, even things like, does meetup.com still exist? I mean, kind of those free communities, either where it's, Facebook based or whoever, wherever you can kind of gather with communities, because facilitation is happening even in informal environments, and this is a thing I want to think more deeply about and do writing about, actually, is that facilitation skills are being used in everyday situations all around us. We don't actually have to be in a classroom or in a formal space where we think learning happens, right?
Yeah.
Where there's like desks or chairs or whatever. It can happen outside. It can happen within our families and so on. So there's all those informal things that we can just notice and keep attuned to. So like, look all around you as a person who's interested in learning facilitation. And maybe someday I'll have a book written on that topic, because it's on my list to do.
Yeah.
But there's more formal things, like I mentioned, liberating structures. There's user groups all around the world where people can attend for free and not just participate in things like liberating structures. They're just activities that we can use in different situations if people haven't heard that term before. But actually, user groups are there for practice. So you can say, put your hand up and say, I would like to facilitate something at one of the upcoming user groups, and just try it. And it's accessible, again, to everybody to try to do that. I was in the volunteer center community, as I told you. And so volunteer centers, maybe, I don't know where you are, and you're in the States, right? Like,
I'm in the States, in Utah. So kind of by California, Las Vegas area.
Yeah, I've been to Utah. So, I mean, across Canada, we have volunteer centers all over the place, and they're great places to either offer up, like if you're a new facilitator or a new trainer, you might want to take something that you know about and see if there are nonprofits around you that might be able to use that topic, and you could kind of practice. But so it's like watching and learning and participating in other people's stuff, but also just really getting out there and doing it yourself, and not being the one to hold yourself back from grabbing those opportunities, because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy and say, oh, I'm not good enough to do that yet. I guess you mentioned Nike before. We're not paying Nike for this podcast, but do it, right? Yeah.
Our unofficial sponsor, no royalties were paid. But
Some good taglines. Just do it and don't hold yourself back from doing it. And I did a whole episode once on dealing with self-doubt, because it can be a killer for people to stop themselves. Like you had already mentioned, right? Like you self-doubted that if you weren't going to be like that person that you saw, you were going to take yourself out of the game. Like, thank goodness you saw another example. So don't be the person that takes yourself out of the game, I guess. Keep going.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's super cool. And I really expanded my view as you were describing too, these kind of formal and then also informal learning experiences. Formal starting with maybe we get involved with a group of other facilitators, but then also, like you said, looking at the world around you. Maybe I even thought like I watch people on YouTube who are facilitating learning because they're very informative and educational in the content that they create. And so, yeah, you can definitely draw inspiration from a YouTube video or someone in the community who is educating and making people aware of local issues. So I love that you pointed out that the formality of facilitation is also such a broad spectrum. And I think it's easy to just think facilitation in corporate or facilitation in higher ed, facilitation in nonprofit. But then you described that facilitation really can be anywhere around us. Maybe we're even facilitating a meaningful conversation with our friends and family about something that's important to us. And that's the same skills apply. And we can get maybe some lower stakes practice in those scenarios and work our way up towards facilitating bigger, higher stakes groups or corporate trainings or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I'll tell you a funny story, Joseph, like when COVID hit and we were all in those Zoom meetings all the time and that's all we had, I quote unquote facilitated a family meeting in Zoom for like a Christmas party. And it was terrible. Like I had one of my cousins just like monopolized the whole room and held everyone hostage. And it was kind of funny, but we were all like, we would like to talk to each other too. I was kept trying to get people to go into breakout rooms. Like I thought I would do like a light touch, but it fell to pieces. Like I was like, I hope no one really realizes that I do this for a living because it was a really terrible facilitation on my part. But yeah, I let my family members get the better of me. But it's a great place to just kind of laugh at yourself and go, okay, I guess I would do that differently next time. I assumed people had some things that they didn't have in the end that kind of sunk us. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on a good note, I was part of a choir for years and I had a choir director that I used to watch and go, wow, that's a really interesting thing that they just did there to get the group to do something or, to bring people together or to get us to start singing or I don't know. Again, there are opportunities everywhere to see facilitation in action. We just have to look for it.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love that story. It's definitely there were those times on Zoom, especially during the pandemic, where what is Zoom etiquette? Who's dominating the conversation, maybe talking a little bit too much, and when can we get into breakout groups and how do we take turns? Do we use the raise hand function? Should we drop something in the chat? Yeah, I think there's lots to learn, and I think you make a great point too that depending on the modality, if we're in person, if we're online, or maybe a mix, we meet with the group online sometimes and in person others, the way we facilitate is going to be different. And I think we'll learn over time depending on the people we're with and where we're at and what the purpose of the facilitation is, whether it's for something that's fun, whether it's for something academic or something that's professional development related. All those experiences come together and teach us and make us better facilitators over time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many sessions have we actually been in over the years, right? Like what's the number of things that we have done that kind of all added up to this, like the knowledge that we have today, here and now. I mean, I have no idea. I've never counted things up, but it's a lot, right? Like when you think of all the meetings that you've ever been in. I mean, I'm a parent, so sometimes there's parent type meetings that you're in with teachers and one-on-one meetings, or there's just tons and tons of things that we can be doing to both practice and also notice things that are happening. Yeah. Both effective and ineffective things too. As I said before, sometimes we learn from the pain points or from the ineffective things most of all.
The same way at the end of the year, we can get like our Spotify wrap. That'd be cool to be able to get our facilitation wrap, to get all the stats of the number of experiences we had where we facilitated or we participated in some form of facilitation and how did it go. That'd be so cool. And I think you make a great point. Maybe there's not a formal summary of that, but it's something that we can reflect on too and just think, well, what was a recent facilitation experience I had? How was it? What did I like? What did I not like? When I find myself facilitating or in a scenario like that again in the future, what will I do differently? And so it sounds like that's kind of a continuous learning and growth thing that we can all work on and just be aware of as we work on facilitating on purpose, whether that's in the workplace or just in other aspects of our lives.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning reflection, right? Because if we kind of just attended the thing or participated in the conversation and we went on to the next thing and never thought about it, we wouldn't have as deep learning around that. So yeah, way to go for remembering that we actually have to be intentional about our reflection and maybe even write things down or journal about it, or, go back and rewatch the thing that you've recorded. If you've recorded yourself in Zoom, and learn from watching yourself do, and seeing things that went well as well. Because sometimes it's hard to, you can expect that you see things that were mistakes. But I remember when I worked with the instructional skills workshop, that was one of the things that I really loved and helped me learn too, is that we recorded people teaching 10-minute mini lessons, and people would immediately balk and go, I don't want to be recorded.
Yeah.
And we go, no, we're trying to catch you do something right. And that's all we're going to show to the group when we record that. And we would pick out a couple little highlights saying, see what he did there. That was really well. See what she did there. Did you notice that you look so smiley in that moment? Like, way to go. And so the opportunities to reflect and to see yourself, because we have the technology to do that now, for sure, are valuable.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we are our own harshest critic. And so when we go back and watch those recordings, I know I was talking with a coworker about this, was we watched an old training call and thought, oh my goodness, look at all the times I was redundant and repeated myself, or the times that I stammered, or did that question make any sense? No wonder nobody answered it. That was so poorly worded. But I love that you also said, don't just look at the bad things to improve. Also look back and say, look what went well. Look how good that question was delivered to the group, or look how well everyone responded to that comment. That was really meaningful. And take those wins and run with them and say, I'm going to do that again. That's what I'm going to keep doing in my work moving forward. So I really love that you pointed that out too, is reflect, look back, but don't just look back for the sake of nitpicking yourself to pieces of all the things we did wrong, but also look back and find those wins and say, I want to recreate that and have that happen again.
Yeah. And sometimes we can do that. The classic thing is feedback forms, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we look at feedback forms and we immediately go to the most negative thing on there and go, I should have done that better. But take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we can't please everybody all the time. It could have been like another facilitator wouldn't have done the thing and they'd be happy with it, or another facilitator could have done the same thing and, they still wouldn't have been happy with, I don't know, whatever, right? Like, we just don't know. Like, we can't be all things to all people, and we never will be. So yeah, again, just kind of be gracious with ourselves. I make mistakes all the time, and it's lucky because I teach facilitation, and so I usually have other people in the room who are learning the field, and so I'll just say, hey, that was a mistake and here's what happened, and I'll kind of drop the curtain and tell them a little bit more about it sometimes, without taking us too much out of what we were doing. But people appreciate that. And actually, in the course I mentioned that we're teaching right now, we got mid-course feedback about that very thing, that they appreciate that we show up as humans and we're failing forward, and we're saying, yeah, we're still making a few mistakes here because we didn't realize Zoom updated that thing and we didn't practice it. And we're like, oh my gosh, where's the annotation button again? Like, we're kind of doing this in front of the group because we made a mistake, right? And go, okay, like, it's okay. We can recover from this. And the group appreciates just, that we're human about it.
Yeah, I love that. Take the feedback with a grain of salt. Don't take it too harshly. Use it to enhance and to improve, and know there will be specks of bad feedback, but don't let that be the only thing you take away from participant feedback. Don't just focus so much on, I didn't like this activity, or I didn't like this part, and just say, okay, one person didn't like that. It's good to know. We'll maybe give another option in the future, but also look at the 10 other people who loved what we did. And let's remember that too, that it worked for some people.
Yeah. And you mentioned options, which is a great thing too, because, maybe next time we would get ahead of it and just say, I've designed in 2 options here. You can do this or you can do that. And that's great around universal design for learning pieces, right? It's like, again, it goes back to the outcomes and what we're trying to do. And if we're really clear, if we solidify ourselves on the learning design side and go, okay, we've really nailed the outcomes that we're trying to get the group towards, then we can either design those choices in, or we can maybe flex more easily in the moment because we know we're very solid. So, I mean, I called my book Design to Engage because in the end, I thought it's the design. Like, when we spend more time and effort and intentionality on design, it is way easier to facilitate something wonderful and something engaging, which is what people have a lot of problems with, right? Like people are struggling still. It always surprises me. People are still struggling about how to engage. And my whole point was when we design more, when we pay more attention to design and give it the effort that it needs, it's way easier when we get in the room with the group, wherever that room is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love that you've got a whole book on that. It's something that can't just be discussed in 10 or 15 seconds, but you got your book Designed to Engage. You got a podcast about facilitating on purpose. I'm curious, Beth, are there any other resources that you would recommend to somebody that wanted to get better at facilitating? So we talked about going and watching facilitating. Are there specific resources, maybe books or videos or tools that you would recommend to somebody who wanted to get better at facilitation?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have to like almost look around my office and think about the books that I have on my shelf around me. I'm pretty sure I have one behind me that is by a woman named Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering. And it's been around for several years. I want to say maybe even 5 or 6 years at this point. But Priya's from New York City and is a experienced facilitator. And a lot of people, myself included, really have appreciated The Art of Gathering for a lot of intentional pieces around purpose and being really clear with the rules that we're creating together and asking people to adhere to and all sorts of other wonderful things. So Art of Gathering is a great book. I'm trying to think of other pivotal resources. I have so many, but I don't want to take us out of the podcast too much. I'm happy to, if people want to reach out to me to ask me that kind of question, I'm really happy to share a little bit more about what's on my bookshelf. But I tend to, and a lot of us in the field tend to post on social media and just share these kinds of tips. So either myself or you, Joseph, like follow us on those places, right? Like LinkedIn is a great place for our field right now. Instagram, I think a little bit still, but there's a worldwide community of folks just sharing all sorts of things all the time. And actually the podcast has been wonderful for me to meet more of those folks around the world and then have them become part of my network. And so I see what they're teaching the rest of us, right? And so just get in the web of, and not the World Wide Web, but just like that network web of facilitators working and practicing and learning and then sharing with each other, because there's just so many of us, and then we can be more up to date as well. I mean, I wrote a book, like there's something about like something static like that, but social media is probably the most current place that we can go. Yeah, so it's not to be missed for sure.
Awesome. And I'm sure people are going to be wanting to get that screenshot of your bookcase and see the things that you've been reading. And I'll definitely make sure to go back and look at the different resources you've mentioned. You've listed some great websites, some great books, great podcasts. You have your own as well. So I'll make sure to put those in the show notes for those interested. And then the last thing I was going to ask is, where can people find you? You mentioned LinkedIn is a great place for people to connect with you. Are there other places that people can find you if they wanted to learn more about your work, the things that you do, and what you're doing moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is great. Beth Cougler Blom on LinkedIn. And that's the same for Instagram as well, at Beth Cougler Blom. And then my company's name is bcblearning.com, or the name is BCB Learning. The website is bcblearning.com. And all the podcast episodes I have are on that site as well as on the various podcast apps like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and so on. So yeah, lots of places to find me, and I really encourage people to reach out. Happy to chat.
Fantastic. Well, Beth, it has been such a pleasure getting to have this conversation with you. You've really expanded my view of facilitation. I came in thinking about the facilitation I did at work, and I'm walking away with just a much broader view and a much richer understanding of facilitation in formal to informal settings, different modalities, different sectors of work. It's just been so insightful. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, share your expertise, and help me and others better understand what is facilitation and how we can get better at that skill.
Thanks, Joseph. I think I heard you first of all on a podcast too. So thanks for inviting me here, but for all of the things that you're doing in the world and for starting this podcast as well. I can't wait to keep listening.
Likewise, thank you so much, and we'll definitely stay connected and have to do some more episodes in the future where we keep learning more about facilitation and keep learning about all the different things that we're doing to create experiences, make learning easy for people, and make it inclusive.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on today's conversation with Beth Cougler Blom. I hope you're walking away with a deeper understanding of facilitation, its importance, and how we can more intentionally create meaningful and inclusive experiences. From breaking down the philosophy of facilitation to making learning environments more accessible, Beth shared so many great tips. Before you go, be sure to subscribe to Talk Learning with me so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's show, please leave it a rating and a review. It helps others to discover the podcast, and it gives me useful feedback. Lastly, if there's someone you know who could benefit from today's conversation, go ahead, share this episode with them. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to learn together. A big thank you to Beth for sharing her expertise and to all of you for listening. Let's connect, and we'll talk soon.